Almost all of the debunk materials on UFO and UAP and their, quote, rational explanations are truly remarkable, for the reason that there is practically nothing new in them for more than 70 years. Weather balloons, airplanes, Venus above the horizon, and other atmospheric phenomena. Most of the academia invent any nonsense for the natural interpretation of extremely unusual things in the sky. But the most important thing, though, is never ever mention the acute and nervous interest of the military and secret intelligence services in all such phenomena. The phenomenon that is clearly the best candidate for an advanced non-human civilization and that demonstrates godlike possibilities. But before asserting anything, it makes sense to quote the point of view of scientists, those who are seriously investigating the technological aspects of the UAP phenomenon. The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies is a small group of scientists whose members are actively studying the phenomenon using a scientific approach. One of their special guests was Dr. Hal Puthoff, physicist that is involved in many U.S. Army projects, including the Black Budget programs that were directly involved in scientific studies of UAP phenomenon in the U.S. Army. He was discussing what from reported anomalous observations of UAP phenomenon can be addressed on the basis of known physics. Things like interstellar travel, if any, and so on.
A wormhole is not in principle ruled out. And I'm talking science fiction here. I mean, this is academic textbook stuff that general relativity people investigate all the time. So that could handle the issue of, well, they're so far away, how could they ever get here?
Dr. Puthoff was a member of one of the scientific groups at SRI that helped to develop the methodology of the U.S. Army Stargate project. In one of the declassified transcripts of the remote viewing session, described an event that very much resembles a wormhole formation. It was noted that at the unknown facility, the event made a very strange light effect, an iridescent outline of some kind. The unknown source described it, quote, "This apparition thing was a light. This was an altering of reality. This was like a whole different energy format, like a hole drilled through nothing." He also stated that this event was caused by something that popped into our reality. The resemblance with some kind of open portal or wormhole intensifies by further statement. Quote, "Connected tissue of reality. There's twisted around in a corkscrew-like fashion from a hole, and it makes for a very strange light effect." Remote viewer described it like a whole different energy format from somewhere else. The further similarity with open wormhole portal effects through the space-time fabrics continues by the notion that it had to do with time or something, like the connective tissue of reality was twisted in some way, pulled apart. Interestingly enough, another source that worked on this light apparition mentioned an object that looked to him like a flying saucer and was connected to this event. Apart from the distinctive sketch of that object indeed looking like a flying saucer, such UFO objects are often reported as glowing or emitting very bright light. Dr. Puthoff proposed his explanation of such a glow as partly caused by the Blueshift effect.
I mean, in the rooms where you're sitting right now, you don't see most of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's in the infrared, it's in the heat spectrum. What we see with our eyes in the visible is a relatively small part of the EM spectrum. But under the conditions in which space-time metric has been engineered to produce the kind of effects you might expect to see in a UAP, you get Blueshift, which means, first of all, some of that infrared is going to be upshifted into the visible part of the spectrum. And so you'd expect craft to be actually quite bright, which is one of the things that in fact is reported.
If this model is correct, then theoretically we can even imagine how our world would look from the inside of such a craft.
Inside the craft, everything is working relatively normally. It's just that when they look out, they see the rest of the world in redshifted and moving in slow motion. So at least in terms of detecting their environment, it's pretty reasonable, what they would be able to see. But On the other hand, there's sort of kind of a simple side of it, and that is the people inside the craft, if there are people in the craft, to them things are very, very normal. So even though from the outside we say, oh, why aren't they fried by the blue-shifted radiation and so on? Well, it's that under this model, all their atomic structure and chemical elements are also all blue-shifted. So relatively speaking, to them, they're in a kind of a normal space.
And of course, with this blue shift effect, there is a prediction of UAP near-field exposure injuries. For example, the visible can be blue shifted up into the UV, and you get sunburn injury, often reported by people who encountered a powerful craft in close proximity. Or if you get too close, some visible spectrum that is not harmful can be shifted up to soft X-ray radiation, and you get radiation injury.
And so it was circa 2011 or so when some people from the CIA and an aerospace company came to me to ask me for their help on the analysis of some individuals who had encountered some anomalous objects, they said. And they came to my office unannounced and then started laying out pictures and data on the table in front of me. I said, first I thought it was a joke. I really thought that somebody was about to put me on candid camera and make a joke of it. But as they started showing me the data, and they were deadly serious about it, because they had basically said at that point, people have died. They were military personnel, people, intelligence agents on the ground, a pilot, a few pilots actually, who had gotten close enough and they had some sort of effects. Objects on the ground that were, glowing or, moving too fast, or they were there and they got too close to it and then it just disappeared. And then afterwards they get these radiation burns. Very often, some of them have been basically on the skin. You see this sclerosis of the skin, reddening, inflammation of the skin. So some sort of electromagnetic radiation, we imagine, but then it goes deep enough into some of their bodies, if they got too close, that would cause lasting scarring within the body, which is not something you ever want to have. If you go back into the historical records, things written by the scientists and philosophers and mayors and kings of the day, it's in the record. This object was seen, it looked like a wheel, or it looked like a shield, and it showed up over our battles, and, et cetera, et cetera. So you can go back and recontext the observations and say, well, if somebody wrote that today, I'd call it a UFO or a UAP.
As for the ancient historical references, the same blue shift effect might be observed by the Egyptian pharaoh who described a miracle during the battle with Nubians, when the, quote, star, as he described it, flew in very close proximity over the heads of the Nubian army, literally burning them alive and spreading panic between warriors. Dr. Nolan mentions another group of specific damages to the brain he researched that occurred during the close encounter with UAP Phenomenon. It's interesting that, as was previously theorized by scientists Viktor Inyushin and Vladimir Sedlak, our bodies naturally possess cold plasma, which, as they believe, mostly localized in our brain and spinal cord. Such bioplasma can provide a natural interface for psychic phenomena often induced by UAP, that at the moment is widely perceived as parapsychological otherwise. And it can be also responsible for brain damage of some observers after close encounters with UAP phenomenon.
And the brain injuries were interesting because one of the things that we noticed in these individuals, and this is sort of a side study which I'm working on with a group at Harvard, is we noticed that an area of the brain, the caudate putamen, in many of these individuals was overdeveloped. And that's a whole other story, but basically we figured out that this is an area where intuition happens, and a lot of these individuals who we had let's call them high functioning. You don't get to be a pilot of an expensive craft without being reasonably smart and having intuition. And so just a side benefit of studying this allowed us to come up with a medical understanding of where cognition is happening in the brain, and we're following up with that in a mainstream science way with a neurophysiology group at Harvard. And we've validated the original findings. But that was it's sort of an example of, because we paid attention to anomalous data, we found an anomaly that really had nothing to do with the injury in the first place, but it told us something about what makes people intuitive and smart.
There is still a group of UAP observations that are hard to explain in technological terms. On the one hand, during an observation, the UAP is a real physical material object that is traceable by radar systems, visible by FLIR cameras and conventional photo cameras, and so on. A leading research and development engineer and manager for NASA, Paul R. Hill, describes in his book that UFOs have a solidity and hardness that is given by the sound of bullets striking UFOs. Quote, UFOs have been shot at hundreds of times. On many occasions, the bullets have been heard to impact. On other occasions, the distinctive whine of ricochets has been heard. He then gives a specific example of Mr. Michael Campiador, who was driving his car on May 13, 1967 in Utah, when he heard an unusual loud humming sound and then noticed a huge object about 50 feet in diameter hovering above his car. Frightened, he loaded an ammunition clip in his pistol and squeezed off point-blank shots. He heard the bullets hit and ricochet as if they had struck metal. The ricochet of bullets in this and similar cases indicate that the UFO shell is composed of a hard material, or at least presents a hard surface, for if it did not, the bullets would penetrate rather than glance off in a ricochet. But on the other hand, these objects are capable of intermediate travel, like going underwater without producing splashes, or going through solid matter like a rock or ground, or changing its shape, or dematerializing and leaving puzzled observers behind. Here is one example of such a highly unusual encounter with the UAP phenomenon of the BOAC flight crew.
We served dinner to the passengers and we were serving drinks, and we noticed there was some confusion in the cabin. Passengers are all looking out of the port side of the aircraft. I went to look too to see what was going on, looked through the window, and there we saw these 7 objects. The one very large one, which was black and solid looking, it kept changing shape. When we first saw it, it was pear-shaped, and then it was stretched out like a cigar, and then like an inverted telephone. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it did look absolutely solid. There were 6 little ones flying in formation, sometimes 3 in front and 3 behind, or 5 in front and 1 behind, but always 6, but changing formation. The passengers, of course, asked me what it was, and I had no idea. I went onto the flight deck and asked Captain Howard. When I got onto the flight deck, Captain Howard and the technical crew were also all looking through the window, and when I asked Captain Howard what it was, he simply said, "Well, I don't know, but for goodness sake, keep the passengers happy."
The entire crew and some of the passengers watched this object for 18 minutes, and it maintained station alongside us some distance away, and I think there's no question that it was no illusion and that it was being intelligently handled.
Now, theoretically, such UAP shape-shifting observation can be explained if it is some kind of a dynamic material or programmable soft matter. If you think this is far out, think again. Programmable matter is a legit field in modern science investigating cutting-edge technologies for military and civil industries applications. Here is a citation from one of the many Department of Defense DARPA documents regarding this subject. Quote, "Materials can be directly programmed to reversibly change their fundamental properties on demand and in real time when desired by the user. These properties include size, shape, form factor, and moduli. A simple example would be an instant toolkit, an amorphous material that can be programmed to instantly become a hammer, wrench, or screwdriver on demand, and then return to its initial form so it can be reused. They are called the basic element mesoparticle, and that, in principle, separability can be exploited to create dynamic materials of unprecedented complexity and capability. But even if all such technologies are possible, they are still based on a dense matter. It appears that UAP Phenomenon uses either very clever deception or very advanced physical principles, or a combination of these that are resulting in the effects that could only be partially explained by known technology. And it seems like a big critical piece of data is missing here.
Obviously, having people present their sightings from other countries and what kind of data they've collected would certainly be of use to us. But of course, we're going to have to share some things that we've learned. And of course, that's what's of great concern, at least in the DoD and intelligence community. And that is they may be missing a critical piece of data to make some giant step forward. And we just happen to have that particular critical piece of data. And if we shared it with them, that would be a problem.
Now, we can only speculate what this critical piece of data mentioned by Dr. Puthoff really is, but from the standpoint of known physics, it could be a complex plasma. In fact, the term plasma didn't occur even once during his presentation. However, complex plasmas are perfectly capable of going through solid matter and travel intermedia, among many other surprising things. Ken Shoulders, the former colleague of Dr. Puthoff, was an experimental physicist attributed the title Father of Vacuum of Microelectronics. He is known for various work related to the field of energy, and has also been credited as an early pioneer of electron beam lithography, which has become a key mask-making technology for modern microelectronics. He explained that there is a fascinating new realm of physical effects not covered by present-day single-particle physics description, but still very much a part of the world we live in. The secret is in the effects of electron ensembles dominating all others. Such an ensemble is called exotic vacuum objects, or EVOs, and is just a recent name in a long line of names for an electromagnetic vortex effect in plasma. Shoulders envisioned the possibility of constructing plasma machines based on such exotic vacuum objects technology. He wrote, quote, "If such a machine resembles anything, it would most resemble a plasma, the fourth state of matter and the most abundant in the universe." Now, theoretically, complex plasma can be programmed in a form of plasmoid drones that would share many properties reported by UAPs and can be extremely complex in their structure. For example, a minority of reports on ball lightning phenomena that fall into the category of exotic vacuum objects as well describe their behavior in such a way that suggests intelligent control of their movements, as they seem to be inspecting people and things and can enter closed rooms and buildings. It appeared frequently inside Second World War American submarines running along the floor, and it was also spotted pursuing and entering aircraft in flight, which presumably would be impossible for a mindless entity, or one that was not remotely controlled by an intelligent entity as a probe. It can explode, it can be dangerous, and it can even kill people on rare occasions. It can be a base for a technology of alternative life forms. As was theorized by Vadim Tsaitovich and others, complex dust plasmas possess everything needed for the existence of such inorganic life in space. Now, considering the existence of the Kordylewski clouds and the suggestion of Professor Robert Temple in his paper and book that they are intelligent, it makes sense that such a life form would want to monitor what is going on here on Earth. And so, what would make more sense than to have plasmoid reconnaissance? The further suggestion is that one of the many roles of the balls of lightning and similar phenomena, and hence also many UFOs, is operating as scouts and surveillance drones that might originate from such plasma-based intelligence. The sudden movements observed in so many glowing UFOs, the right-angled turns, the rapid disappearances, the vast speeds, the ability to go underwater and re-emerge, and so on, all make instant sense if one assumes that they are complex plasma-based flying systems. Other observable attributes, such as the bright light emission, glowing effects, ability to go through any media, solid or liquid, and keep their integrity, are attributes that are part of their physical nature too. Moreover, as it has already been discovered, complex dust plasmas are perfectly capable of producing matter from nothing in the form of dust particles, the discovery that was firstly reported by Gary Selwyn and his team. But what if it is also capable of producing metallic particles in a similar way? In fact, we know that it can. There are numerous papers regarding this topic, where various technologies are discussed based on such possibilities. Then the question is, what if the metallic retrieval materials from the alleged UFO crashes were originally produced by plasma-based phenomenon?
In the public unclassified menu, there are a number of claimed pieces from various craft, from crashes, or one was shot off decades ago that has pretty good credibility and so on. So I think setting up a materials lab would be the best.
Back in Silicon Valley, we're sort of, there's a group of people who are getting really interested in this because we've got new technology to analyze materials. And it's hard to do, okay? And it's only now that we've really got equipment, scientific equipment that can really look at this. I mean, materials are the same throughout the universe. I mean, iron from Mars is just like iron from the Earth. The isotopes, they would be the same ones in outer space than they are on the Earth. Okay. What could change would be if somebody was altering artificially the ratio of the isotopes within the elements. So it gets pretty complicated.
There is the novel of the Strugatsky brothers, Hard to Be a God, in which the storyline follows Anton, known by his alias Ramata throughout the book. As an undercover operative from the future planet Earth, he is an observer on the alien planet society that is stuck in the Middle Ages. He has been eventually uncovered by the Prime Minister of the kingdom, who recognized him as an imposter, and that there might be some supernatural power behind Ramata, because Ramata's gold is of impossibly high quality. In our case, such impossibly high quality could be discovered in UFO alloys.
What was found was that one of the components of the magnesium, one of the isotopes of the magnesium, was way over what it would be in nature, in the natural magnesium, which means somebody took it apart and reformulated the magnesium. Engineered at the atomic level for, say, in 1954, at a level where our technology hadn't evolved to the point of, for example, separating the isotopes. We're doing a survey of all the samples that we have from a number of crashes like Roswell. Roswell was not unique. It was not unique in New Mexico, and now we have samples from Europe, we have samples from South America. Obviously, somebody could take, common elements, refine the isotopes and put them back together. Of course, that was done for the atom bomb, it would between different isotopes of uranium. So if we find that some of those samples have been altered, that's a revolution, because it means that there is somebody somewhere, either on Earth or off planet, who has the technology to do that for a particular purpose. If we find that, that's a revolution.
If you're talking about an advanced material from an advanced civilization, you're talking about something that I'll just call it an ultra material, right? It's something which has properties where somebody is putting it together, again, at the atomic scale. So we're building our world with 80 elements. Somebody else is building the world with 253 different isotopes.
It almost sounds like a technology straight from the Star Trek movie, the famous replicator machine that can create and recycle things. In the real world, though, Imperial College London physicists have discovered how to create matter from light, a feat thought impossible when the idea was first theorized 80 years ago. But before them, it was nuclear engineer Dr. Takaki Matsumoto who discovered a nuclear collapse which was induced by the electromagnetic force in the laboratory during studying the mechanisms of so-called cold fusion phenomena. A special formation of hydrogen clusters called micro-ball lightning were found to directly enable electronuclear collapse that allowed completely broken materials by electronuclear reactions to be regenerated again to thin tubes and films of conventional elements, such as carbon, oxygen, and iron. He called this process electronuclear regeneration.
You might even be able to use this technology to, with a computer, to 3D print from whatever junk you can find, anything you want by dialing up and down the coherent matter state and ejecting either pulses or continuous beams. So you would go to, I don't know, a bit of dead space, and you would build your spaceship out of the energy that you are condensing from the coherent condensate of cold neutrinos in the cosmos. So you wouldn't actually need to mine anything.
The remarkable point is, as Dr. Matsumoto wrote, that electronuclear collapse-related phenomena could take place widely in the natural environment. And by controlling it, by controlling the breaking and making matter from the proto-matter state, you might be able to 3D print anything with any element you want. If this or similar technology is used to build dense vehicles that we observe, then some UAP might be using the metal as a part of smart programmable overcoat to perform some specific tasks. But there's more to it. Even though any plasmoid reconnaissance and surveillance powers would not need to be operated by anyone, very often some beings reported inside of various UAPs and discovered the electronuclear collapse principle would make it possible to create them on demand.
And when you got it to a level of expertise, you might even be able to, and you could like change the frequency at extremely fast rates. You could print things like, I don't know, sugar molecules or DNA or whatever. You could literally print an atom and then the next atom to it. And as it came out of its coherent matter state to a decoherent state, it would produce, I don't know, a protein.
We realize that different tasks require different tools. So, could it be then that a plasma-based life form has means to create robotic organic entities to act on their behalf? Especially since we know that robots can certainly be organic.
So I think that part of what we're seeing here, I mean, look, if you're an intelligence, are you going to go down on a planet with a bunch of angry monkeys who might kill you? No, unlikely. You'll send some intermediary. Well, what kind of intermediary are you going to send? You're going to send something that maybe almost looks like them, but isn't them. So I think, and this is, again, from inside the intelligence community, most of what we think we're seeing are avatars, biological robots that are basically put there to be the minions, if you will.
If so, these unconventional metal alloys are only one side of the metal. To fully understand its other side, we should keep in mind that UAP phenomena is both physical and psychic in nature. The UAP phenomenon can also deceive an observer by triggering psychic effects either purposely or as a side effect of its manifestations.
It's an encounter, it's an experience, but whether those experiences are real or whether or not they're imposed on these individuals as sort of an altered reality memory, I don't know. I mean, here's an example. There's a great case, it's in France. This family, this is just within the last few years, driving down the highway, a mother and two children in the back. They have an open-top car during the day, a crowded highway. They see over their head through the window a craft. I mean, it's just obvious, and then she's looking around. The mother's looking around and saying, and noticing that nobody else seems to see this. Okay, so the kids in the back have a camera, a phone, take a picture. When they get home, they take a look at the picture. There's not a craft, but there's an object, a small sort of star-shaped object about 30 or 40 feet over their car. So let's say that's the object, but it projected an image of something else. And yet, that's all they saw. So what happened? It's sort of like it was a projected 3D image of something, but it was only seen by them. So when you start to hear many of these cases, and Jacques Vallée talks about this a lot, that whatever these things are, seem to have the ability to project altered reality into people's minds. I know that sounds crazy.
Such sightings could have been triggered by a giant plasmoid in the sky, the form of complex plasma that in fact can be extremely intricate in their structure. Paul Sagan, in his book on ball lightning, often calls them fireballs and presents a lot of bizarre examples of real plasma phenomena intrusions into our world of dense physical matter. Sagan has an important section called "Do Flying Fireballs Think?" Here are some quotes. "But fireballs possess sensory, energy generation, navigation, and propulsion systems. Since ball lightning is buoyant, how come some fall rapidly from clouds like falling cannonballs, rebound before hitting the ground, and then float lazily against the wind or rapidly shoot back up to the clouds? How does a ball know where an aircraft is, follow it closely, and not be affected by the high-speed airflow and turbulence? What possible detection, sensory, energy generation, navigation, and propulsion system do fireballs possess? No other natural or man-made control feedback system matches their incredible behavior. A microprocessor-based system or fireball with sensors that can materialize and fly, then detect electromagnetic, electrostatic, metal, solid objects, chimneys from a distance, distinguish a standing person from a post, and so on, would be an amazing feat of technology. But for a supposedly hot ball of gas, it is not made of semiconductors and wires. To do these tasks of sensing, control, and navigation is not a question for technology, but a mystery of physics. Paul Sagan made one major error in this last passage from his book, though. He implies that these balls of gas are not made of semiconductors and wires. On the contrary, plasmoids can indeed have the equivalent of semiconductors within them. And as for wires, much more efficient means of carrying directed current exists than copper wires. We have to just stop thinking in terms of physically dense matter. In fact, semiconductor does not require physically dense substances like silicon and germanium microchips, and the transmission of current does not require wires of any kind. Plasma equivalents of both semiconductor and wires are fundamental to complex plasmas, especially to plasma crystals. And it appears some fireballs or lightning balls are indeed complex plasmas and can be full of internal cells, semiconductor regions, and filamentary current carriers galore. Ken Shoulders, in the part of his article titled "Plasma Machines," wrote the following, quote, "This is the most fantastic tale. I will discuss how to make an intelligent organization without any parts at all. It may turn out that we will not be able to see the machine, not because it is small, but because it is not very dense. If the machine resembles anything, it would most resemble a plasma, the fourth state of matter and the most abundant in the universe. A complete machine could be built on this principle. We will enter a zone of electronic construction technique where normal laboratory apparatus will diminish and new tools fashioned in a bootstrap manner will become increasingly electronic vortex-like. This is the precursor to true electronic manufacturing, where no mechanical or chemical tools are needed to make an all-electronic device. Internal structure self-organizes and emerges from dusty, complex plasmas, and some of the lightning balls are probably of that category of plasma. And in line with discovery of complex dust plasma in space known as Kortolewski clouds, such complexity can be to the extent that is required for inorganic life, the subject that we only relatively recently start to think about. Here is what Ken Shoulders wrote about it in his article. Quote, "All life as we know it is based on atoms. This monopoly ended on Earth recently with the discovery of the binding force responsible for the electromagnetic vortex effect. If such a pure electron embryo had emerged, even as recently as 100 years ago, its high evolutionary rate would have already surpassed us in every desirable aspect. Homo sapiens would be no match for Electronus Rex. A stronger broth, comprising the binding energies of the EVO, has been available here all along, and probably long before biological substance was available.
I mean, whatever it is, it's clearly been here for a long time. And it doesn't necessarily care so much about us, but in terms of, you know, if it wanted to wipe us out, it could. So the next question is, well, if they've been here all along, before we were even civilized, well, whose planet is this really?